And now, it's Boomer Life, lifestyle discussion designed to make your life more engaging, meaningful, and complete. Celebrating the baby boomer generation, this is Boomer Life on CIL 650.
Well, hello and welcome to Boomer Life here on CIL 650. On this episode of the program, we're going to talk about wellness and good health and YesWellness.com. Specifically, it's a real pleasure to welcome Dr. Paul Zickler from YesWellness back to the studios of CIL 650. Hello, Dr. Paul.
Good evening, Stuart.
It's good to see you, and thanks for coming back. YesWellness is a company that you are a part of forming. How long has YesWellness been around in existence?
Couple years now.
But you are a well-known person on the medical scene here in Vancouver, having spent many years, almost 20, at Royal Columbian Hospital in New Westminster, where you were in charge of the emergency department.
That was a long time ago.
It was, but it was fantastic training for what you've evolved into doing with your career these days. Take us back to being at the center of the emergency, because in your time, in that almost 20 years at Royal Columbian, the whole role of the emergency department and the emergency room physician really transformed, and you were a big part of making that transformation.
Well, yeah, we all were that we are at that stage because there was no specialty of emergency medicine.
Exactly.
So the fellows at VGH and Royal Columbian and St. Paul's were really the sort of the pioneers of the whole specialty. And we were all instrumental in developing the core curriculum and being examiners for the exam and to develop the actual specialty, which it is now.
Right, and so now you can actually train coming out of med school to become an emergency room physician, can't you? And that didn't exist when you were in med school.
Exactly. Now it's a formal 4-year specialty program.
Exactly.
And it was we were at the beginning of that, which was so exciting.
I'll bet it was. However, I mean, you can't imagine working as an emergency room physician, and you translate that even to working as a paramedic or people who are first responders. And of course, you're part of the first response team. They pick them up at the accident scene, they rush them right to you. Got to be, particularly over time, a tremendously stressful occupation.
It is a stressful occupation, and you have to have a certain personality that's going to be able to manage that stress. I think for me and some of my colleagues, that started that time after 20 years, there was a change in terms of how the actual department ran. So in the first, say, 10 to 12 years, which were the most exciting parts of my career, there was no difficulty getting patients into the hospital, getting them into the ICU once we finished with them in the emergency department.
Right.
The hospital wasn't overrun with patients. We could always get the patients moving, and if we were inundated, we were able to shift them around to other hospitals very easily and very quickly.
Okay.
But after about 12 years, there was a shift in terms of how transfer payments came from the federal government to the provincial government. Suddenly, the money that everyone was expecting and spending quite freely was being really reduced dramatically.
Also, it had less to do with population growth and more to do with the financing of it all.
Exactly.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I thought it was the opposite.
No, it was mostly financial, and I think all the provinces went through that difficult period, and all of a sudden we were asked to reduce and relook at how we're spending our health dollars. And
do more with less, right?
Exactly.
And that certainly hasn't changed in time, has it?
And so the emergency department started to have a backlog of really sick people.
Right.
In addition, that whole sort of transition in terms of how medicine was being delivered, we're noticing that we're having less family doctors, so there is less likelihood of a patient being able to get to see his family doctor in a timely fashion. So where did he go?
Emergency.
He went to the emergency department.
Right.
And so that transition all sort of started at once.
Right.
And so by the time I felt it was a time for me personally to change, my stress wasn't the stress of looking after the patient, doing things to treat the patient, and how it doesn't matter how acute and how complex the problem was. It was the stress of not getting him somewhere in the timely fashion and being asked to look after admitted patients as well as all the new acute patients.
Right, right.
With ambulances waiting at the door,
Sure.
trying to get into the department.
Yeah.
With that was my stress,
Right.
and that was stress I could never come to grips with. I could manage all the other stress. That was like, I always think of Wayne Gretzky when he was in the midst of a Stanley Cup playoff. When you watch him play, he became slow in his motion. Everything slowed down. Everything seemed like he could see the whole rink. And I felt that myself and my colleagues of that era had that sort of ability to slow everything down and make everything reasonable, so we can operate very effectively and efficiently. But when we got to the point where we're having all this other stuff that I couldn't control, that's when I felt the stress.
Right, I'm sure. And eventually it built up to the point where it just made sense to leave. And so then you got into the clinic business. You and some colleagues from your emergency room days decided to open some, we now call them walk-in clinics or wellness centers, and they're quite popular. But again, back in the day, you were pioneering this approach around Metro Vancouver.
Yes, we did. And our view was so much different than what walk-in clinics are now. Our view was that we would be a sort of a small, less acute emergency department.
Right.
So we actually designed our first clinic in Langley to make it look like a small ER. We had cubicles for quick and fast visits. We had a suture room, a plaster room. We had an eye room with a slit lamp. We were equipped to deal with. We even had a place where we could start IVs and deal with anaphylactic reactions, and we felt that we would take that sort of less acute load from the emergency department, deal with that, and then refer the people back to their family doctors. But over time, of course, there was a lot of, at that time, there was a lot of negative feedback in terms of we're taking patients away from their doctors and being involved in care that's splitting the care, the continuity of care, and which were very, very understandable arguments. But we didn't see them that way. We felt that we were improving the care of the patient.
And history does prove your perspective to be quite accurate. It wasn't evident at the time, thus the negativity from some quarters when you decided to go in this direction. But hasn't history proven that your approach to be bang on?
Yes, but we still haven't dealt with that less acute emergency. Now, I mean, the clinics, our clinic evolved finally where people were coming back to see us to get their sutures removed, to get their cast replaced, because they couldn't get into in timely fashion to see their physician or the plaster clinic or whatever. So you started seeing patients that just wanted to come and see you again and again, and so the focus of the clinic started to change, and we had to redesign our clinic to deal with a change of at times. And now walk-in clinics are really reverting to family practice, which are leaving times open for walk-in patients, which I think is a good thing. But we're still missing that sort of less acute emergency possibility. And you can see what's happening in the emergency departments now. The emergency departments, the new developments are they have a separate walking wounded away from the really critical care, the metabolic illnesses, the cardiac arrest, the heart attacks, the acute severe abdominal pains, with the chronic illness. So they're separating them with different doctors in those departments so that they're dealing with that subacute one in the hospital.
Replicating the idea that you and your colleagues had 20 years ago.
Right.
So now when you had a few of these early day wellness centers that you had organized and started to run, and then you moved on because you got into online prescriptions. Tell us about that, because it's a really fascinating story, and this is not the first time it's happened, but a Canadian company, or in this case a Canadian physician or a group of Canadian physicians, were discovered by Americans to be, dispensing pharmaceuticals that were considerably less expensive than exactly the same product in the USA, correct?
Yes, that is correct. And it started out actually, one of our clinics was in South Surrey, and unbeknownst to us, that we did have a large number of patients that were coming from the U.S. and coming to us as family doctors because they just lived across the border. It was more convenient for
So
them.
they'd be in Ferndale or
Yeah, sure.
Blaine or sure,
Bellingham,
okay, right.
whatever, Linden, and they would be coming to us because the visits were considerably cheaper.
Right.
The children's vaccines were considerably cheaper, but I never put two and two together. I just assumed it was just more convenient.
Sure.
They kept on coming to see us. Until one day, one of my partners saw a woman visiting from Seattle who came in because she had forgotten her tamoxifen, which is an anti-cancer, breast cancer drug.
Okay.
And at that time was a brand drug, and it was exceedingly expensive in the U.S. Anyway, so she came in, and my partner assessed her, and then wrote out a prescription for her for the tamoxifen. And sometime later, she came back and she was crying in the waiting room, and the clerk asked her what the problem was, and she said, "I just need to see the doctor again." So she put her in the exam room. My partner went back to see her, and she was distraught because she was so happy.
Oh, really? Tears of joy.
Exactly. This is exactly what she said. "I've just gotten my 3-month supply of tamoxifen. The same amount of money I paid only covered a quarter of the pill which I was taking in the U.S. I couldn't afford to take the full pill. And I've got $300 left on top of that." So she was able to afford the whole pill where only she was affording a quarter of the pill. Plus, she had $300 every 3 months. Extra.
That's crazy.
That's the difference in the price. As well as, if you can remember those days, our dollars were $1.65.
Well, that's true, yes. Right.
So she got an extra bonus of the exchange.
Exactly.
So you say, "Oh, that's great." We didn't ever thought anything of it. But a week later, the Seattle Times interviewed my partner and said, "We can't believe he had done some homework, got the list of the most commonly used drugs, and
found
compared the prices."
Astonishing differential between U.S. and Canadian
At that
prices.
time, there were probably between 70 to 90% difference. That's a huge, huge margin, especially when you look at people on a fixed income, retired, and
or on a disability income because of some chronic pain,
or uninsured.
Yeah,
45 million people in the U.S. are uninsured.
Right.
I mean, that's huge.
Mm-hmm.
So he said, "I want to come and do a piece on you."
This is Seattle.
Yeah,
okay.
and interviewed and take some pictures, etc., which he did, and it was a full-page article. Well, that then got Cairo TV interested. They came up, and then they brought a busload of Americans. And when you hear their stories, they were really dramatic. And I remember discussing this with my group of colleagues and saying, "Listen, I don't know what we opened here, but if you listen to their stories, if the tables were turned, wouldn't you want someone there to look after those patients, to be able to get those medications?" So you're hearing stories of people not taking their medications, taking less than what they're supposed to.
Sure.
And these are all probably 85 to 90% were chronic care medications. So for their diabetes, for their high blood pressure, for their high cholesterol. And so wouldn't you want to have someone there take them under their wings and help them get their medications if they're that much of a saving?
So your colleagues said, "Well, of course we would," and so begins a whole new chapter in the life of Dr. Paul Zwickler, because you and your colleagues then go into online prescriptions, right?
Right.
How long did that last?
Well, the office was open for a couple of years before we're online, and we opened an office to take away from our walk-in clinic.
Mm-hmm.
We opened an office just for Americans because the volume of people was filling our walk-in clinic.
You must have been a little overwhelmed.
Well, we were overwhelmed, but it's not so much being overwhelmed is the fact that the patients were, they were kind of getting peeved because they're taking these people are coming from the States, and I'm here a local. This is my doctor. This is my clinic.
Okay.
So we opened the clinic, and we were only open for, I don't know, 6 or 8 months when 9/11 hit.
Oh, right.
and traffic across the border.
I was just going to say, and suddenly the border became a real obstacle. It's always been there, but it was pretty easy to go back and forth before 9/11.
Exactly.
Now, how about the shipping of goods, as in pharmaceuticals, across the post-9/11 border? Is it difficult, Dr. Paul, or is it still business?
Well, at the time, interesting you should ask that. At the time, we asked Canada Post and U.S. Post, and they suggested to us it's illegal to ship drugs. However, we noticed online that, in fact, some of our competitors
in Manitoba,
Manitoba,
out of Winnipeg, they were doing that.
Were shipping drugs.
That's right.
Yeah. And so then we made an appointment to go to the FDA in Bellevue and ask what the true feeling was. And we did. We went there, and we thought we'd be there for an hour. It was exactly 10 minutes. He gave me a sheet of instructions and gave me the 4 guidelines. And he says, if you follow those 4 guidelines, which were basically, it's for personal use. Sure. No narcotics. There's a prescription from a licensed physician, and that they're not going to resell the product.
Right.
He said,
follow the guidelines and you're
follow
home
the
free.
guidelines, and we're going to allow these packages to go through.
Interesting stuff. Need to take a quick break here, and we're just getting started, friends. Very fascinating guy, Dr. Paul Zickler, and we haven't even got to Yes Wellness yet, though we are quite close. And then we're going to talk about 10 things to throw away for better health. A great episode of Boomer Life. Glad to have you with us today, and we're back with lots more right after this break.
Celebrating the baby boomer lifestyle. This is Boomer Life on CL 650.